What do you do on Sundays?
We talk about Cate Blanchett, the acting, the costumes, the awards, but mostly the Blanchett of it all.
I'm not acting.
You think this is a love affair?
I saw you, Erica. Meeting in the middle.
This is Sundays with Cate, and I'm your host, Murtada Elfadl. Welcome to Sundays with Cate, the podcast series about the films of Cate Blanchett. Well, this is a special episode, similar to what we did with Kate Winslet and with Dame Judi Dench. Today we're discussing another actress that's not Kate, that I admire, Carey Mulligan. Carey Mulligan is very hot right now. Everybody's discovered her this year, so she has been doing fantastic work for over a decade. I'm happy that the rest of the world has caught up to me. I have admired her since the beginning. Since An Education, I've seen her stage work, I've seen all of her movies, and she is somebody I really like watching. And this is why I wanted to do this special episode.
What are you doing?
Hey, I said, what are you doing?
We burn things, because war's the only language men listen to. Because you've beaten us and betrayed us and there's nothing else left.
My choice is to do something hard and boring. It's not enough to educate us anymore, Miss Walters. You've got to tell us why you're doing it. Don't suppose because I'm a woman I don't know the difference between bad goings-on and good. I shall be up before you are awake. I shall be afield before you are up. It is my intention to astonish you all.
I was very happy that my guest for this episode is writer and producer Jordan Crucchiola, host of the Disaster Girls and Aughtsterio podcast. Jordan, welcome.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me, Murtada. I really appreciate you having me on to discuss, really, one of the greats of her peer group, like of her set of actresses of that demographic of this time, like the sort of millennial veterans. Yes. She really is. Carey Mulligan is such a treasure.
So much, and she has given so many varied performances. And it was, just looking back, I didn't watch everything to get ready to talk to you, but I watched the two movies that we decided we want to talk about in detail, and I just watched a lot of other clips and interviews, and it's been really fun just doing that to get to talk to you.
Yes, no, I was telling you just before we got on that I've really been enjoying the experience of just really processing and trying to internalize her work and her screen presence and her almost impressive lack of persona. Like she really sort of harkens back to an older model of starlet, where there is actually a sort of sense of mystery about her, but not because it's forced, just because she generally opts out of the scrum. And not to say that, not to say that contemporaries of hers opt in necessarily, but say I think a very relevant counterpart for her would be Keira Knightley. The way they came up together, same age, I believe they're very close friends in real life, and the way
they've made a couple of movies together.
Yeah, and the way they sort of matched it at Pride and Prejudice, and have sort of gone in step with their careers, close with one another. Keira, because of, Bend It Like Beckham was a bit of a sensation of its own, but then of course Pirates of the Caribbean, which just such a massive property, and flung her into a certain level of fame. There was an involuntary level of attention and scrutiny put on her from a very young age, making similar career choices to how Carey has done. But just as a bit more of an object of tabloid fascination because of the volume of certain things. Whereas Carey is just sort of she lives her life in the UK. I think she lives in Devon. She has her musician husband, and she's she seems to only take the work she wants to take. I feel like she's, negotiated herself into a very kind of amazing sort of career where it's, she's working at will. She doesn't seem to chase parts she doesn't believe in, and has really settled into this, she has such a sort of confident veteran air about her at 35.
Yes, absolutely. And very interesting that you say she doesn't have a persona. And I was thinking about the reason of why suddenly in 2021 or 2020 with Promising Young Woman, everybody suddenly discovered Carey Mulligan when she's been doing great work for 10 years. Because I spent the whole year when people would be like, Carey Mulligan. I'm like, I've been saying this for a decade. So do you think that lack of sort of screen persona is what maybe held her back a little bit from, not, obviously casting directors and the industry respected her, which is why she got cast in all these movies and with these, major talents, whether in front or behind the camera. But
Totally.
just with audiences, maybe they couldn't place her, they couldn't, sing her praises like they should be sung until this year.
No, it's really, because obviously FYC campaigns, when you're on the march for awards, like, the point is saturation. I remember when I realized, like, probably 2 or 3 years ago, I really realized for the first time the time commitment that is stumping for awards. And this isn't a situation where it's in a pandemic. It's not like you can have all the canapes and the glad handing sessions. Like, this is largely people Zooming, it seems like, probably from their homes, and, like, wearing red carpet dresses, but just being photographed and, like, posting that stuff on Instagram. I really realized, I think it was in, like, Shape of Water, watching Guillermo del Toro for Shape of Water and Jordan Peele for Get Out, and realizing how many new pull quotes I was seeing from them every week, and thinking, like, oh my God, if you don't live in LA and you need to promote your movie for the award circuit, you probably just don't go home for 4 to 6 months, because you have to be on the circuit. Maybe you go to New York a little bit, but otherwise you're camped out at some, like, you probably get, like, a long-term rental somewhere in the city, and you're like, well, I have to go to a dinner or a screening or a benefit or a something or an award ceremony every 4 nights, so I guess I'm just gonna stay here until all these ceremonies are done. And Promising Young Woman has accomplished something really phenomenal in my mind. With it seems like the heat around it and the anticipation of it did not wane for almost an entire year. Like, the level of, like, sort of chomping at the bit for this movie to arrive felt like it was at a consistent pitch from the time it played at Sundance and got those initial sort of, like, sensational reactions to when it came out on Christmas Day to when it eventually then later reached people on video on demand. Like, the level of conversation around it, there are ebbs and flows, obviously.
Yeah.
But it stayed at a high level for, like, 11 months before this movie actually got to people. So that was a lot of time spent wondering about Carey Mulligan. That's a lot of time spent just knowing the faintest bits about what she's going to give you if you maybe only associate her with costume dramas. And so it was like this mystery of what Carey Mulligan could be doing was pervasive in the consciousness before so long before we finally got to see her. And it is brutal for any movie that has to live up to an extended period of you have to see this, you have to see this. Like, there's almost no way any movie could ever live up to that kind of suspense. Regardless of how one feels about Promising Young Woman, I absolutely love it. It's my favorite movie of 2020. It's probably going to be my favorite movie of 2021 because I consider them debuting in both years. I feel like the common denominator and the only point of dissension I don't get about it is if people are not like, Carey Mulligan is a fucking monster. Like, that she just devoured that. I have to, in my heart, say the only objectively one correct way to think about Promising Young Woman, with so many different ways you could interpret it and feel about it, the one correct way to feel is that Carey Mulligan fucking destroyed that role. It lived up to what you could have imagined it being, all the things you could have imagined it. And the way that it subverts what we know about her with this sort of, like, antithesis of persona is tremendous. Like, she's sort of this, like, lovely, stoic. It's been interesting reading interviews about her leading up to this conversation and hearing her tendency toward doing, like, she has said, my like, I have to tell directors when I work with them, if you want me to go bigger, you have to prompt me, because my instinct is to always do the least. It will be to do the minimal amount of expression, to just find naked truth in anything that I'm doing. So if you want more, you're gonna have to kind of direct that out of me. And in this, like, she's not overdoing it, but the viciousness that comes off of it is just such a different gear. I don't think of this as something like, Carey Mulligan's surprise isn't... No, Carey Mulligan's an incredibly dynamic actress. To think that this is surprising that she could pull this off, I think, is patronizing to the breadth of things she can do in her career. But it's just a gear we haven't seen yet, and it is thrilling to watch her access that.
Yeah, I saw, I think, a similar interview to the one you it was around Suffragette, where she was talking about watching herself, and she's like, the first time I watched the movie, she's like, I thought I did nothing in this movie. which I think is to the point you were making. It's her tendency to kind of do minimal, to just, and she has that face, all the great actors do, the great screen actors do, who have that face that can convey so much. I don't know
So
what they
much.
do, but the other funny anecdote I heard in the interviews that I was listening to is that these, after all, I mean, she's known for these British period pieces. She's always in a corset. From Farther the Madding Crowd to Pride and Prejudice to even The Dig just this year. So she said, I think this was also around Suffragette, and she said something, I told my agent, my next movie, I have to be wearing jeans. And I think she finally found that part, that modern, provocative part that maybe she was looking for in Promising Young Woman.
I have to wear jeans. Well, which is, I feel like when Carey Mulligan says that, she really means it, because she has expressed, like, she's not exclusively looking for costume dramas, and in fact is looking for things that challenge her beyond costume dramas, but finds that the substance of leading roles for women, and probably supporting roles too for women, in roles that are typically adapted from already standing work, as a lot of these costume dramas are, that's where the most meaningful roles she's found that are offered to her exist. That's where she's found the most fully fleshed out characters is from these adaptive works. And it's, I think there's one quote that I remember, she said that, like, it's our biggest export in film is period pieces, is costume dramas. So, like, that's obviously what we do here. And she likes to work at home. She likes to, be where she's from and where she lives. So, like, the fact that she was like, look, I know that this is a vein of material that actually gives me consistently amount of substance that I want to work with as an actress. So if she's the one saying, I need to wear jeans, she's really goddamn tired of not wearing jeans.
Yeah.
Like, you better get out there and find that script.
Yeah. So to start our conversation, do you remember the first time you saw her? What was the first movie you saw with Carey in it?
The first thing I saw with Carey in it wasn't actually, I haven't seen much of her TV work, and yet the first thing I saw Carey Mulligan in was, and I don't watch Doctor Who. I don't not watch Doctor Who, but I don't tune in for it. And yet I have seen maybe half a dozen times her episode of Doctor Who, Blink, where she plays
really?
Sally Sparrow. I don't know why I have seen this episode of Doctor Who multiple times on accident, but it is the one I think I associate with Doctor Who, and she's in it. And as I understand it, it's one of the more famous episodes of it because it's just a great, contained horror story. And that was the first thing I really remember seeing her in. And then it probably was An Education and then Pride and Prejudice. And then going back to that one, which is, there's it's almost like a fascinating outlier role in Pride and Prejudice because it's so girlish. And not to say that Carey Mulligan and her presentation is not girlish. I think that's a big part of her roles.
I think it's the voice to me. The voice is so deep and mellifluous and just powerful that it's not that, girls can be powerful, but it just sort of gives you a more mature well, in Pride, she's sort of like ditzy Kitty Bennett. Like she's silly and she's girlish, and so often in period pieces, even roles for young girls, you're either playing the naive girl on the way to harrowing self-awareness because you're coming of age in a world that doesn't want you to have rights or humanity, or you're playing kind of that ditzy Kitty role, or you're playing the girl who has to become a woman at the age of 15 because the realities of her life are that you get married and you have kids, or you you inherit the estate at a really young age. So even in young girl oriented parts, there is a sort of advanced maturation process that I think has to happen in the costume dramas. Whereas with Pride and Prejudice, it's one of the few times where on film we just see Carey being an exuberant kid. And not that there isn't any kind of animatedness or fun throughout any of her performances, but it's oh wow, there's that little gem. Because then even you move into a role where she's very much playing a kid in The Greatest, where she's playing a teen girl who gets pregnant in high school and her, paramour dies and she's sort of left in this relationship with his family where they're all mourning him and she's about to have his baby. She's still playing a child in a very grown-up situation of about to have a baby. So there's this weight of the world that wears so incredibly effectively on the face of Carey Mulligan. She is like the vessel for all the suffering of white women throughout
Like the white women suffering that is in Carey Mulligan's eyes is so incredibly evocative. And I say that because it is done so in a way that, like, it doesn't feel like insufferable white feminism. It feels very honest. It feels very gritty. And it's not very true to her, like, minimalist instincts. It's not done in a showy or histrionic way. It's just like, you constantly get the sense of every Carey Mulligan character that she's seen things. Yeah. And she's been through things.
Yes.
And it feels so honest in that way.
Yeah. So my first time was probably Pride and Prejudice, but frankly, I don't remember her making an impression on me with that movie. But she definitely did with An Education. And I remember seeing An Education and being just sort of flabbergasted by, who is this? And at the time, I think because of the way she presented herself, not in the movie, but just in press, with the haircut, and sort of she's British and kind of European and an air of sophistication. All the comparisons were to Audrey Hepburn. And at the time, I didn't question or examine those comparisons, or I just took them inside. I'm like, yeah, she's Audrey Hepburn.
Right, because like it's a great comparison. You want to hear that, yeah.
Totally. But then when you look back at that performance and at that movie, it's not Audrey Hepburn. There is a thorniness to it. It's such a complex character. And, you know, she is somebody who is a teenager, but rebellious, but also rebellious in this way that you were just describing, this quiet rage that just simmers right below the surface. Her emotions are checked in, which is, I think, one of the things that I love about her persona is that she implies that there is a volcano inside, but
Carey Mulligan is a contained explosion.
Yeah.
She is a contained explosion in every role.
Yeah. And that was what was frankly amazing about An Education, because that woman was so just trying to get out of this life that was prescribed to her, whether by her family or whether by the school, by the system. But she had no way to actually rage. So it was all just simmering below the surface. And, you know, that's not something I see at all in the screen persona that we know of Audrey Hepburn. So that comparison now rings to me not true, but I think maybe in the way she presented herself at the time, especially the haircut, it was very, very, very Audrey Hepburn.
Well, and I think it suggests, to me, that it's a parallel with. I appreciate the vulnerability and the layers of Audrey Hepburn's work, but it feels like what it's reaching for is just an ingenue comparison, as opposed to, like, really actually examining the specificities of the presence of Audrey Hepburn and Carey Mulligan. It just, like, decides that they're both these, like, lithe, delicate, kind of, like, cosmopolitan flowers. I just, there's too much of, I feel like a really interesting thing about her and why she was such a perfect choice for Promising Young Woman is there is such an edge to every Carey Mulligan character. And not that there isn't an edge to, like, any good character beneath, like, there's layer and meaning there, but such that unsuspecting sharpness. Like in Far From the Madding Crowd, her sort of, like, whole ethos as a character is that, like, she can't be tamped down. Like, she wants a man who's capable of taming her, but that takes an exceptional kind of man to do, because she, you know, is inherited this estate and she is now the head madam, and you won't be answering to a man, you'll be answering to me. But all those, like, the costume dramas have to exist, and similarly with The Dig recently, it has to exist within the constraint of you have to push back extra hard because of what the world innately expects of you or demands that you cannot do as a woman in these, like, earlier time periods, you know, most significantly earlier time periods, if not still now. But there's such I was so glad to see in Promising Young Woman, just getting to see her play with more overtly in a modern present day context, that devastating coldness that she can have about her. Just that, like, I've armored myself to the world and this is how I'm coping with it kind of strength. It was a thrill to see just that thing that she does so well. Just getting to see that be the forefront of the character instead of the undercurrent of the character, because, you know, it's typically sort of a drama of manners that is powering her through beneath the surface. But on the surface, she has to be sort of like the soft debutante. And yeah, to underestimate the knives that Carey comes in to every role carrying is to underestimate her vastly.
Yeah, absolutely. So for this conversation, we're going to get back to Promising Young Woman, but for this conversation, we each chose a movie to discuss. So we chose Steve McQueen's Shame from 2011. That was your choice, Jordan. And I chose Paul Dano's Wildlife from 2018. So since Shame came before, let's start there. Why did you choose from Carey's, like, you know, she has really such an impressive filmography in just a little bit over a decade. Why was Shame your choice?
Because it is Carey Mulligan, even for all of her variedness, almost is never a chaos agent. And in this movie, her purpose is to be a chaos agent in the incredibly, almost obsessive compulsively fastidious life of her brother, Michael Fassbender's character, Brandon. And she arrives as a home invader. The first thing you hear of her is her annoyingly leaving voicemails for her brother, who is like being, you know, emotionally unavailable to seemingly the only family member he's probably in contact with, just given the bare implications of the difficulties of their home life that were kind of given throughout the film. And, you know, just on the answering machine, Brandon, just like nagging at him.
Yeah.
And Carey's never a nag on screen. Like, regardless of what she's never a nag. And then you see her, the first thing you see of her is completely stark fucking naked.
Yes.
Standing in his bathroom.
What an entrance. And this is like, it's sort of like the classic movie star entrance where you hear the character's voice or you hear them being talked about and then they appear. But I think this movie adds even another layer of that. The first time she's completely stark naked in the bathroom.
Just totally naked in front of her brother. And he's like, you know, thinking he's about to beat someone to death with a baseball bat. And she's just like, what kind of shampoo do you use? Is this for dogs? Like, she immediately diffuses the notion that she would be there as anything other than normal, because chaos is normal for her. And there are, you know, both brief and long shots in this movie just focused on Carey Mulligan, where she's having like a whole character journey that Steve McQueen really just lets her live in, where she, you know, obviously there's the one of her singing New York, New York, and there's just the most haunting melancholy manner where you're sort of seeing any of the hopefulness she still has left in her as she is performing this number, just straight to camera, filling the frame of what this dream she might achieve of being a performer and being a singer, while you're also seeing these flashes of doubt come across your face of like, is this it? Will it ever be real? Or, you know, there's so much kind of devastation in even in the sound of that song and in just the little business of what she's doing with her face. And then there's the much more brief, but just like agonizing moment where she's on the call with presumably her ex, just pleading with him, let me come back, I love you, just saying I love you over and over again in the most agonized manner, and it never sounding the same twice. And just watching, I love genre film. That's my area of specialization, horror and action and things like that. Like, I love the sledgehammer movies, and obviously with how this goes, you can feel like, given her sort of ethos as a performer, like, I will always do the, you know, I quote, well, I will always, you know, go to the bare minimum. You can feel that Steve McQueen was probably like, more. Like, I like, we're going further outside of your box. We're going further outside of your comfort zone. And her desire to be challenged by roles, be slightly afraid of roles that she's going to take, because that's where sort of the meat of a new, you know, ability to rise to the occasion lies. And then to watch something like this where she is sort of, in the context of her filmography, a maximalist performance. Because even as sort of vicious as Cassie is in Promising Young Woman, she's not maximalist in that way, but this one, sort of every scene, you feel like she's going to disrupt every single thing around her just by virtue of existing. Yeah. And I love getting to see. It's fun hearing Carey Mulligan yell impulsively. Like, the scene where she, you know, they're finally coming together in the morning after their weird shower encounter, and Michael Fassbender's making breakfast, and he asks her if she wants, she's like, do you think I'm fat? Do you think I'm fat? And then he just doesn't say anything. She's like, oh, just the aghast look on her face. How dare you? And then she goes and sits at the table, and he brings her the eggs. She takes one bite. She's, oh, so good. She just yells it out. And to watch her just feel like she's vibrating on a frequency where she's like, all right, I'm committing to being a different person entirely from every instinct that I have. And I am going to be the most bitchy little sister you've ever wanted to not have. And there's so much vulnerability that comes throughout whenever you see her in the movie. Like, she's what I'm waiting for throughout the whole movie, is chances to see Brandon interacting with Sissy. And I just love the amount of character that she brings to every second she's on screen in that movie.
Yeah, I love that performance too. And so, Shame is the story. It's mainly about the Fassbender character, Brandon, who's a sex addict, and sort of like his crumbling life and how emotionally lost he is. But I think once Carey appears as his sister, she brings, you said, chaos, but I also just think she brought a sloppiness to his life.
Yes.
And to sort of the movie, she's so sloppy, not just drunk or
she's
not
a fucking
dressed.
mess.
Yeah, she's such a mess, and he's so orderly in his life, and everything is organized, and just like, even though what he's doing is basically jerking off and having sex all the time, but it's still in a very organized manner. And so she brings, she's so sloppy, and it's just like she turns the movie upside down, like when she appears. And one of the things that I always sort of love actors who modulate their voices, and she's somebody who does that so well. And
she's so good at that. Wow.
And in Shame, she sounds like she never has sounded in any other movie. Like, she's usually has this, her voice is a little deeper, but it's higher in Shame, higher than in any other movie. And I was so struck by that. I'm like, so she's using the voice to sort of tell us how sloppy, how chaotic this woman is. And it was just, to me, and even when she's singing that rendition of New York, New York, which is, to what you said, was melancholy, but it was also so, she was so defeated singing it. Like, you could be like, it says, like, that line in the song where, if I can make it here, I can make it anywhere. Like, when she says it, it's like, I didn't make it, and I'm never going to make it here or anywhere else.
I didn't make it. Yeah. You, like, her eyes kind of search for a moment. Like, it's up to you, New York, and you decided, and I didn't make it. It's like a eulogy when she's singing it.
Yeah, totally. That's perfect. It is totally a eulogy. And it's just like, it pierces you. It's just like, it's like somebody punched you in the stomach with that song, which is not what usually a song in a movie, that's not the reaction we're supposed to feel.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And while her, like, emotionless brother is, like, trying to hide that he's crying, it's like, well, you can't fucking blame him. This is harrowing right now.
Yeah.
If I can make it there, I'll make it anywhere. It's up to you, New York, New York.
And so this was such a change of pace for her. I think, people heralded at the time as sort of this, because she was known for those period pieces, that this was something completely different. And I think that was true, and it was something different. And looking back, I just don't think that we realized at the time what a great performance that is. But I've seen Shame many times since it came out, and every time I'm just like flabbergasted by sort of what she does with so little, because she's so restrained. Like, she knows this is Fassbender's movie. This is the other thing. She's such a generous actor. So she knows this is Fassbender's movie. So she's not going, like, in their scenes together, she's like, you lead. Like, she's not trying to wrestle the scene from him. Even though she is playing the flashier character, she lets him shine. And that sort of interplay is also something like a generous actor would do, but I think a younger sister would do to her older brother too. So it's just like, it's such a complex, thorny, sort of prickly sibling relationship that they both play so well together.
No, because the movie is just so, like, not in a theatrical sense, but just like coldly depraved, as you watch the descent of Brandon, the only moments of humanity are, even when he's being a dick to her and she's being a nightmare to him, the only moments of like grounding in the entire thing are when you see that, like, they cannot help but come back to one another because they're all one another has. Like, even like the moments where somehow there's an adorable moment in this movie when they're on the train platform together and she like leans her head into his shoulder and he leans back. Because, like, ultimately, she probably is the only person that he loves. And watching their physicality in this movie is so captivating because it's so upsetting. Like, there's clearly an interesting relationship with physicality between these two. Like, from the moment we see her just, like, fully naked in front of him and not caring,
not trying to cover herself at all.
No, and then at one point he flips out at her because he's had enough of her just sloppy ass life in his living room, and he jumps on top. He doesn't put on clothes to do it. He, wearing a wrapped towel, jumps on top of her on the couch, straddles her, and is just like grabbing her by the shoulder, screaming, "What do you want from me?" And at first she's laughing. At first she is playing along, like, "Oh, what are you gonna get mad at me, Bran? You get," like, it doesn't immediately occur to her that this is a weird or threatening situation, because there's obviously a broken boundary there where her brother, in a towel that's fully falling off of her body, would jump on top of her and start yelling at her. And when he doesn't relent, that's when she's like, "Get off of me, you fucking weirdo." Like, when she says that, he gets off and he runs. And then she calls and apologizes the next day, and we hear one of her voicemails. And the way we see, like, her constantly trying to close the physical gap between them, just being so perfectly indicative of how desperate this person is for love. Like, how desperate this person is for affirmation and for validation that somebody wants to touch them, that somebody wants to interact with them. When she goes and gets in his bed after she spent the evening fucking his boss in his bed, you know, while he wasn't in it, he goes to bed and she comes in and just, like, crawls up and starts to spoon him, and he's like, "Sissy, get out of my room." And he has to keep screaming until she leaves. And when she first gets there in the morning and gloms onto him when she asks when she can stay and hugs him from behind, and there are just repeated instances of him having to physically pull her off of his body, because you can tell this is a part of their relationship, of her trying to close that gap and him obviously trying to widen it, but him being like, "You cannot physically be so close to me as you are always trying to be." And it just emphasizes, like you said, the kind of compounded defeat that this character brings in, that we ultimately come to understand the severity of when she tries to take her own life. And it's, you know, that all the pieces fit to, you know, it's a logical conclusion based on what we've seen, but it makes every piece of the puzzle coming together up to that point. It's a better movie, I feel like, when you return to it after a first watch, because I think knowing what's coming rewards the weight of every single performance choice in the movie, and her choices are just so vibrating and chaotic that it grounds them in a kind of haunting melancholy with each time you see her reaching out for more love.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the sort of that physicality between siblings is, I think, why that movie at the time wasn't as appreciated. I think a lot of people could just not take it. The fact that this brother and sister could be naked around each other, or could have this sort of, I don't want to say it's strange because it's just theirs, but maybe something that most people are not used to between siblings. Yeah. But it's
definitely in America, that's not a fluidity that we are comfortable with.
No, not at all. And they were playing Americans. There is a line that I laughed at, is that they grew up in New Jersey, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah, truly, the least grounded part about Shame, the most unbelievable part, is not like the sad circus of, like, hate fucking that closes the movie. It's them being like, "Oh yeah, we grew up in New Jersey." You know, sure.
But it's also, it just, to me, it hints at, you know, at turmoil, at something that has happened, not necessarily between them, but something that has happened to them as a unit when they were growing up. And that's why they have this strange relationship. And it's very powerful, because I think it's one of those traumas that doesn't bring you closer to the person who had it with you. It sort of,
that's a good point,
drives you apart. But still there is lingering things there, which is why it is so strange. And it's up and down throughout the film. It's really well modulated, like in the screenplay, the way they play it, obviously, but it's just like, you know, props to Steve McQueen too, for sort of giving them the space to play this out, like, because it's so physical, this relationship, that the way that he sort of holds, he's known for these sort of long takes, but the way that he holds those takes while they are left to play together is just, it's what makes the movie.
Well, and it feels like a movie about quote-unquote Americans that only a non-American filmmaker actually could have made. There's just a sensibility to, I think, international directors, that there is more comfort in those silences and long shots. And, you know, obviously that's not every single American director is not uncomfortable, but like just like the film economy and sort of American filmmakers and what we're steeped in, the rhythm of this movie and the way emotion is handled in this movie just feels so not of an American filmmaker. So it was in that way, like, I love that this collection of Europeans is like, we're going to make a story about this American fucked up family.
Yeah, I mean, Shame is so good. One last note that I just want to mention about it is that the last voicemail that she leaves for him is so devastating, and this is back to my point earlier about how she uses her voice, because she that's sort of like, there is always something in her voice that sort of tells you exactly what the movie's about, and there is
that's a good point.
In that voicemail, she says to him, "We are not bad people. We just came from a bad place," and in those 5 simple words, 2 sentences, you sort of get the history of this relationship that we've been trying to unlock and sort of like figure out for the last hour and a half. And then she just gives it to you right there in her voice.
We're not bad people. We just come from a bad place.
You suddenly like the highly likely prospect of like years of abuse are like, you can't be sure, but you're as close to sure as you can be without having like factual confirmation from the parties involved. And suddenly it's like every choice that these characters have made, like you said, it tells you the entire movie is about this one sentence.
Exactly.
And these people are neither of these people are anywhere close to having reconciled what she said with the reality of who they are today.
Yeah. So, listeners, if you haven't seen Shame, go watch it immediately. If you're in the United States, it's on HBO Max. So
yes,
it's 2 clicks away, basically. So start it right now. Jordan, is there anything else about Shame you wanted to say that you haven't touched on before we move on?
I think her choice to take this role is a wonderfully indicative thing of sort of her curation and her career, and speaking specifically about like wanting to pursue it, because, and I feel like you do hear this from actors a lot, but Carey doesn't work a ton. She's a busy actress, certainly, but she's not she's never super saturating the landscape. She seems very deliberate about what she does.
Which is the best way, because, you want to miss them. You want to miss your favorite actors a little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah.
And the fact that she was very, that she was fearful of a character like this and of a part like this, but knew she wanted to throw herself into it headlong anyway, I feel like is very representative of how she has operated throughout her career. And she's also, I was reading bits where she talked too about the directors that it seems kind of intuitive, the directors that she has felt the best working with are the ones where she has fully put her trust in them. And it seems like this was you couldn't make a movie like Shame and feel good about it afterwards unless you had a really good, trusting, working relationship with the filmmaker, and Steve McQueen in this case. And to know that she wants to choose bracing roles like this, despite the fact that she is sort of most marketed as a costume drama figure with films out of the UK. I think that ethos, I think, is such an important reminder of the motivating sort of mindset of this actress, really, at all times. These aren't like stunt choices. She's always hoping to find the thing that frightens her a bit, that moves her into a place she hasn't been before. And when she does, she's very discerning, and she's got good taste. Yeah. So when she does make these choices, she makes choices like Shame. She makes choices like Wildlife and Promising Young Woman. Like she's a good curator. And I think that is, I think where people might not be familiar with the breadth of her work might consider her sort of maybe limited in her scope of what interests her. She's just discerning is what she is. And when she is discerned that something is worth her time, she's fucking fearless.
And this is definitely an example of that. What you were saying reminded me of something I heard in an interview that she gave. She said, like, when she gets offered a part, she tries to imagine somebody else doing it, and if she can't stand the fact that somebody else did it, then she says yes. Otherwise, she's like, "Oh, it's fine. I don't need to be in that."
Well, and I liked too that with physically in the role, she talked. I was reading an interview, I think with The Guardian, around when it came out, where she talked about she knew she was going to be totally naked, but there was absolutely no mandate to be a certain way in her nudity. She was like, I was eating whatever I wanted. I was just completely comfortable on screen, and it was so nice to not have to worry about that. And to know that it was a rare part in her filmography where she would be completely unclothed, and she was not stressed because she knew she could just come into the work as she was. A beautiful fucking woman. Like, there's just, I mean, Carey Mulligan's doing great. But, like, the fact that
but it's not that sculpted body that we're used to when
yes,
actresses do.
The fact that there was a comfort going into it because of the lack of pressure to be the most unrealistically perfect version of her physical self. Even in a role where she would be more exposed than anything she had done before, is really nice. That's just a really nice thing to know about it. That it wasn't especially fraught because she was going to be naked. It wasn't fraught because she knew she could just come as she was.
Yeah. So Shame, great movie, great performance. So for this conversation, I chose Wildlife, which is the 2018 Paul Dano movie. And this is a story, it's a story about a teenage boy dealing with sort of his parents' impending divorce. His dad decides to go away and abandons the family. But the central sort of conflict here is the Carey character. She plays Jeanette. Yeah. She's this wife and mother in it's set in 1950s Montana. She's somebody who sort of set her life as once she makes the choice of who to marry, or she says yes to the man she's married, she sort of thought that maybe she doesn't have to make any more choices or think that much about her life. But when her husband sort of leaves the family for a while, it's not like he leaves forever. He goes away for a while.
Yeah, he takes a job sort of off-site. There's a great fire burning in Montana, and he's in a crisis of his own because he loses his job, and he makes the big decision of like, okay, I'm going to go off and fight these fires, and that means being in mortal danger and being away from his family. And then suddenly, Jeanette is a single parent and a woman essentially on her own. Yeah, probably given the era for the first time in her life. I would imagine she went from parents' house to his house. Yeah, exactly. And not only just, it's like for the first time that she has to think about how to earn a living, about what to do. And sort of, I love this movie because it's all about the confusion inside this woman's head. It's all about what she does, which is also similar to Shame, very chaotic. But this is somebody who's not a sloppy ass sissy. This is somebody who's sort of, she thought that her life was set, and then suddenly the rug is pulled from under her, and she has to examine every choice that she made, and she has to think of how she's going to sort of move on. And what she does first, what's the confusing thing first, is that she just thinks that she has to find another man. And sort of this sort of leads us to the first half of the movie where she's trying to do that. And then the second half is where it's sort of more where she comes to like, oh, this maybe is not, it's not just about finding another man. It's like she needs to find herself. And I chose this movie because I was just, as usual, just so enamored with Carey's performance in it. But it's also follows this tradition of which is, if your genre is horror and action, my genre is women unraveling. Yeah, amazing choice. Because I just think that, when women unravel on screen, they show us their vulnerability and their humanity, while men just become violent, which is not fun to watch. So, like, to me, this sort of falls into the tradition of Jenna Rollins in A Woman Under the Influence, or even going all the way back to the gold standard Vivian Leigh in A Streetcar Named Desire. Recently, we had Kate Blanchett in Blue Jasmine, and, every single Pedro Almodovar character is basically a woman unraveling. So this is part of that genre, and this is why I chose it. And Carey was just like, I remember watching it the first time I saw it, and I was just like, this is her Blanche. She might not get to play Blanche Dubois, but she got it. This Jeanette is her Blanche Dubois. And it is that sort of like, the character is chaotic, but the actor, she's so in control of her instrument here. Like, all the choices that she makes are so exacting. Like, it's just like, it's not, sometimes when an actor sort of chooses to do something, or they think about it, that Pauline Kael thing about Meryl Streep, I can see that she's thought about it, or she's thinking about it. But to me here, I know that Carey thought about this, but also like her choices and what she thought were just so right for this character, because every time she drops the voice to sort of
hone in a moment, or that scene where she's drunkenly dancing. Every choice in that scene is all about telling us how confused this woman is, how she can't deal with what is happening to her. She's in such turmoil.
And you feel the reality just radiating off of her, that what magnifies her spinning out is that she knows there are so few choices. Like, okay, so I feel this way, truly, now the fuck what? Like, it's a sort of tale as old as time with women, but there are at least some more choices now. They're at least like, well, if you can embrace yourself and embrace the unknown, like, there are avenues you can take. This is 1950s in Montana. I feel like, is probably still the 1950s in Montana. So I can't imagine what it was fucking like in the actual 1950s. And like the way that she remarks, like in the movie, like, that, your dad always, basically, he has to run away from things instead of facing them. How dare he leave us alone in this lonely town? Like, how dare he leave? Because, like, truly, what is there for her? Like, as a woman, her options are already limited. And she only gets, like, when she knows she has to go back to work, she's, like, pounding the pavement, trying to find out employment opportunities at places. She's reading ads in papers. And there's one woman who takes pity on her, not when she's asking for a job, until she says, my husband's looking for work too in case you're hiring. Because she says, is there any work for a man? And then it's only then does the woman soften and realize that both of these people are out of work and that they're really on hard times. She's like, well, do you know how to swim? And she becomes an instructor at the Y. And just she's, again, just the weight of every white woman's suffering in like in the modern era is inside the eyelids of Carey Mulligan. And to just watch her, she is so adept in this movie at these just surprisingly barbed things she can just toss off when she says them, because it's not a sense of cruelty. Like, it's an amazing mother and child story. Like, it's taking the hours and knowing, like, that Julianne Moore's character had to flee her life, and like Ed Harris's character, like, grew up sad without a mother and became a great poet. It's just like, let's just watch the entire movie from the perspective of that era of Julianne Moore's character and that devastation, and let's live in that quietly for an entire movie. And just it's so ingrained in her how sort of unhappy she is and how adrift she is. The incredible like, you highlighted it in sort of a document of notes that you sent forward, where she says, like, do you have a better plan? If you do, tell me.
Yeah.
I'll try it.
Similar to what I said
and
about...
And she says that to, like, a fucking 14-year-old boy. Like, her son. Like, you have any better options for my life? Because I'm willing to try anything. It's like, holy shit. Yeah. Whoa.
And similar to what I was saying about Shame and that voicemail, again, this was the moment that unlocked this movie for me. It's like, she doesn't have a plan. Like, she is looking, can anybody help me?
Yes.
And this is why she's going through this. And, the movie has a lot of loud moments. And this is also something that Carey doesn't sort of do that much of. We talked about how she's always restrained.
You feel it when she does, because boy, does she save it.
Yeah. So, but also, I think what I loved about we're going to talk about the one loud moment in detail in a minute. But before we get to that, like, what I loved about this performance is a lot of it is in those sort of tiny moments right before she says something. So she is somebody that I like to watch think on screen. So there is a scene at the end when she's sort of already trying to seduce some rich man, failed, and she decides that she's just going to be on her own, find a job, find an apartment. And she's breaking the news to her 14-year-old son and to her husband, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, who has come back from the fires that he went to work on. And so she takes this one beat before she says, I got an apartment in town. And it's like the camera is right on her in like a medium shot close up. And you can just see on her face, like, the sort of, the enormity of this decision, that it wasn't an easy decision to get to, that she now just needs to be on her own, but she has made it. There is a little bit of relief, but it's just, you can tell that this was a very hard and big decision that took her a long time. And even though, we saw how she got to it, it just, in that moment, she registers all of that.
that whole car ride that she has too with her son and Ed Oxenbould is doing such a good job
Beautiful
in this movie.
Performance.
And like she's like, you know, the way this movie just kind of constantly plays with your feelings is very brutal of it and very effective. And you know, he gets him in the morning and she's like, "You want to skip school?" And you think like, oh, they're going to have a day. Like, they've been having a really hard time. She's really struggling. She's making some real questionable choices. Like, she's clearly having problems. She's taking it out on the kid a lot. Like, this is really hard. Like, oh, they're going to have this nice day. And they're driving, and she starts, like, telling him an anecdote about how her dad says, like, there was no point in crying about things. And just that, her incredible voice, her incredible, thick, like, at times, borderline smoky voice where she's just like, and you know what? He was right. And you're like, yes. Oh, holy shit. And then she takes him like she's like, here's the staging area for the fires. And you're like, what's going on? And the boy's like, oh, are we going to go find Dad? Like, he's stoked that they may have just taken a road trip to find Dad. And she's like, no, I'm not getting in there. Absolutely not. And she keeps driving. And they drive up to a wall of fire. The forest is burning to the ground. And you just hear, like, for the longest time, we just watch them watching it. We don't see the fire. We just hear it. And like, what does she say to him? She's like, do you still sympathize with him now? I'm sorry, both of us can't. And it was like, oh my, she drove him all this way to say that was the point of this trip. I'm sorry, we both can't. It's just but she just quietly shreds her husband in this movie so incredibly well. And like, you're with her. And I know she had to like confront some stupid response to this role of people being like, wow, I can't believe this was, she's a terrible mother and she treated her son this way. And she's like, her response was, we don't give women any latitude on screen to be anything but model people. And that's ridiculous. Like, women can make tough and bad choices and it's our job to like empathize with characters in a film. That's what, you know, watching a film is for. And she's had to sort of diffuse responses like that to roles a few times in her career, being like, well, it's really fucking misogynist that you're saying something so reductive about what women can and can't do on screen. And she's very forthright about that stuff. She doesn't sidestep those kinds of criticisms. And I think that's an interesting thing about like the sort of non-persona that exists, because she's always just pretty much candid. Carey Mulligan is pretty much a straight shooter, and she doesn't really present a like, you don't picture her team having like a media plan of the things Carey like will and won't do. That's like, well, we're cover only or we're this, that, the other. And that she's going to like give you a party line answer when she responds to things. Of course, she's going to like do the press circuit thing. But you also feel like Carey's going to like pretty much come at you from her heart of hearts when you ask her a question. Like her whole profile that she had in the New York Times around Promising Young Women called like, the title of it is Carey Mulligan Isn't Letting Hollywood Off the Hook. And she talks about, you know, she says, like, I read the Variety review because I'm a weak person. Just because I'm a weak person.
Yeah.
And then, you know, there are certain times where poor reviews are called out and you're like, you just didn't want anybody to poorly review your film and you're mad about it. But you feel from her when she has these complaints that they are specific, that they are grounded in reality and not a sort of fantasy of being beyond reproach. And from a true just like dry sensibility, sick of this bullshit, which is why she does, it's like you can kind of feel implicit in her answering these questions about like the horseshit of what goes on in Hollywood by her sort of generally opting out of the media machine, but for what is absolutely necessary to promote her work.
Yeah. I love reading her interviews. I love watching them. She is, I agree with you that she's a straight shooter. I do want to, you know, if we go back to Wildlife for a little bit, I want to talk about
of course, yes.
that one scene in a little bit more detail. But I also just want to think, when I saw Wildlife and I saw it at the New York Film Festival, I really thought that this was going to be the movie. And that was a year when I saw Carey in her one-woman show, Boys and Girls, which played here in New York. And that was such a great performance, and she's somebody who's so comfortable on stage, and this was a one-woman show where she just held that stage, and she's like, you know, there was nothing else to watch except her. There were just a couple of props and just her, so it was like such a high level of difficulty performance. And then a few months later I saw Wildlife and I was like, oh, this is completely going to take her to the next level. This like these 1-2 punch of these two performances, these two sort of really great characters that she got to dig into and do a lot with, is definitely going to take her to the next level. And, you know, we had to wait a couple of years until Promising Young Woman. But I think what why that movie was not as appreciated as it is. It's back to what you just said. It's like people just thought of this woman as this bad mother. Like, how could she play this someone who takes her 14-year-old son on a date where she's trying to seduce another man other than his father? Like, I think that's why this misogyny of like, well, this woman had no other choice. She saw that was the only thing that she could do. Like, if you watch this movie, instead of just being sort of bogged down in the thing about like she's a bad mother, like even at the post premiere at the New York Film Festival, all the praise went to Jake Gyllenhaal, and I was just like, did you people watch the same movie? Like,
he's gone for most of the movie.
I know.
Like, that's the point, is that he's gone for most of... That's fucking ridiculous.
I mean, I think it was the moderator who kept asking men to ask questions or pointing at men to ask questions, so that partly his fault, but also partly just like, I think people could not praise the character and thus couldn't praise the performance and the actress. Because, you know, yes, let's call her a bad mother for the sake of argument. But that doesn't mean that the performance isn't great or that the actress is not doing her best work.
It's an incredible performance, and I think a thing that, as far as the industry machinations go, as far as the horse race aspects of it go, I think a thing that catches her, I think a sort of thing that like keeps her grabbed by the ankle, is the same thing that it does with Amy Adams. She does natural so well, and I think she just makes things look so true, so simply real, that you forget how hard that is. Like, Amy Adams is our like quintessential naturalist of the American actress set, and I think Carey Mulligan does a similar thing where, like, I feel like, you know, the lines around the sort of commentary around Hillbilly Elegy when that was coming out on Netflix was like, this is screaming Oscar bait just like so hard its throat is bleeding. Like, this is unbelievable. And like with Amy Adams though, it's like Amy Adams will like constantly feel like I feel like the number 2 in the list of 5 Best Actress nominees, because the person who wins that year is going to have done something that was a little flashier, that was a little louder, that was a little showier. But because she is so adept at just making the little business of being alive feel so real, it's just easier to look past that and be like, oh, we'll get her on the next one. We'll get her on the next one. The fact that Carey was nominated for an Education and wasn't nominated for something like Shame.
Oh, Wildlife.
And wasn't nominated for something like, well, it's like, guys, we already know you like her. She's on, guys, she's only getting better. Yeah. Like, what the
and
fuck
this
was
is such a next level. She's proving that she's getting better and better. What's wrong with you?
She's fulfilling the promise of the Oscar nomination that you gave her 10 years ago. Like, if that was good enough, why isn't that? Like, I'm not saying, you know, there shouldn't be a greater variety of actresses nominated for Academy Awards. Of course there should be. But it's kind of like, if you were going to say that rose to the level, I truly do not know how you say that these subsequent works that capitalize, that show that talent was for real, and there is a maturation and an advancement even from that time. If that was good enough, then how the shit have some of these roles not been good enough since then to rise to that level of recognition? Because, wow. Just what, like, she can do so much with stillness. And that was something that I was thinking about as I started reading interviews with like Emerald Fennell coming into this, and found a quote, I think it was in the IndieWire interview that Carey did with them, where they ask Emerald about her, and she says, you know, her stillness on screen is just so incredible. And that is like the dynamic nature of your talent to make stillness that compelling, that's incredible. Like, and what she does in this movie in the absence of obvious flair is just devastating. God. Yeah.
So I wanted to just go back a little bit to Wildlife and talk. The centerpiece scene in Wildlife is this long scene where Jeanette decides that her only choice is to seduce this rich man, Mr. Miller, who she met because she gave him swimming lessons. And so, but at the same time, she's not 100% sure that she wants to do this. So he invites her to dinner and she takes her 14-year-old son with her because she's not sure that she wants to go all the way, but she still thinks that maybe this is her only choice. And so she gets there, and it's a long scene, and we get Mr. Miller talking to the son, but also we get her getting drunker and drunker and trying to dance and trying clumsily to seduce Mr. Miller. And every choice that Jeanette makes is wrong, but every choice that Carey makes is completely right.
Yeah, exactly. You're cringing so hard for her when she starts, like, he's like complimenting her husband on him going off and fighting the fires, and she was like, well, Mr. Miller would never do that. He's like, I actually admire your husband. Like, every time she says a shitty thing about her husband, he's like, well, actually, and he kind of says something nice and empathetic. Like, Mr. Miller's not really doing anything much wrong in this scene, and she just keeps... Every instinct of hers is just devastatingly bad. But, like, as you said, that underscores that Carey's choices are so right to show this just woman careening down a hill emotionally.
It's so hard to watch, but it's also so fascinating to watch. Like sometimes, like, I think, not the first time because I was in a big movie theater, so the first time, but I was watching it on Netflix and I was just like trying to hide my face a little bit as I was watching it.
I was trying to make myself as small as possible watching that scene. Oh, when she's trying to get her son to dance and you're like, don't make him dance. Oh, please don't make him get up. Oh, no.
And the brilliance of Paul Dano's direction, I think, in that scene is that a lot of it plays on the son's reaction to it. And he doesn't do much. He's just watching, kind of like not knowing how to react, but also not believing what is happening inside of him. And it's just like that duet of like Carey unraveling and her son just not believing it. It's so heartbreaking.
And I think she said, like, from an interview I was reading about that movie, she said that, like, after, like, they had done a take and she was like, oh my God, that was awful. Like, I fucked that up. Like, and she's like, I think she said, like, she feels drawn to roles that she's afraid she's gonna fuck it up if she takes it, because that means it's like really, strong material for her. And they like, I think, done a take of the scene, and she went to Paul and was like, oh my God, that was so bad. And he, like, assured her, he was like, well, actually, like, I'm going to need you to go a little bit bigger. Like, I'm going to need you to go away from that sense of minimalism. And if you just do the worst job you can, I think that's actually going to get us close to what we want. Like, be what you think is actually the worst performance you could give in this scene. And I think that is going to give us the best performance we can get for this.
Yeah. And that's why I chose this performance. That is why this is my favorite Carey Mulligan performance. This is why, if listeners, you want one Carey Mulligan movie, my recommendation is Wildlife. Is that I think
really good.
The notes that she plays in this movie, in this role, are different than what I've seen her play. We talked about how she's always restrained. She's always the fire beneath the surface, that volcano that's just not going to erupt, but you can feel it crumbling and trying to get out. But I think in Wildlife, it gets out. It doesn't get out every time. It gets out in a few scenes. And it's just so gorgeous to watch. And so that's why this is my favorite Carey Mulligan performance.
Well, and I think, like, to the point of, like, she's being a bad mom, she starts off, they are such, like, a sweet, cute family at the outset when you see them at the dinner table. And, like, he seems to clearly have, like, a good relationship with both his mom and his dad. And, like, they're a good little nuclear family. And the way she, like, kind of helps him with his homework and she's scratching his head, like, you don't get the sense that this is a household punctuated by so many horrors and we're only being lulled into a false sense of security. No, it's about to fall apart. It has not yet fallen apart. And so when she starts making these really rash choices and saying these really, like, disarming things in front of her son, I think what that does is it underscores how devastated her character is internally and how hopeless she feels, knowing that this person who she obviously loves, who she has been a good and attentive mother to, like, even in the face of that love she has for this boy that we see so clearly at the outset, and that warmth she has for him, she is so undone inside and has been so unable to care for herself individually that not even that great and clear love for her child is something that can intervene and be like, okay, recalibrate, you got to keep it together for him. No, that just emphasizes the nature of the turmoil inside of her. And I think that is the thing that she handles best in this movie, is working around that dedication to this boy, this character. It's as far as like roles playing the mother go, you know, playing quote unquote the mother on screen. It's a tremendous mother character that actually lends depth to the woman in question, as opposed to flattening her by making her like a mother heroine, like to make her either like the whore or the angel kind of thing.
It's a very reductive way to look at work by actresses,
God,
and especially this movie and this performance. But unfortunately, I think that's why this movie hasn't broken out. But, you know, it's such a complex performance. It's such a beautiful character that I think she really digs deep into. So, and it's, if you're in the United States, again, I'm not being paid by Netflix or HBO Max, but this one is on Netflix. So it's also
it's
2
so
clicks
watchable.
away.
Yes.
So Jordan, I want to end by, what is your favorite Carey Mulligan performance? I think I know, but I want you to tell me and the listeners what it is and why.
It's a Promising Young Woman. Because again, this comes from, and not because it is necessarily a greater performance, like, oh my God, I didn't know Carey was capable of such a thing. I love the sledgehammer cinema. Like, I love, make it obvious for me. Go over the top. Go bloody. Go big. Go maximalist.
I love when filmmakers go big too.
I fucking love it. And why that movie works is because the world is so hyper real, and it's so ultra femme, and it's candy colors. That grounding force of Carey Mulligan is what makes it functional. It is what makes it not just a caricature, and it is what makes it so poignant. It is what makes that, like, the way, again, the devastation that Carey Mulligan can wear. To me, before anything else, Promising Young Woman is a love story. It's a love story between Cassie and Nina, these best friends who were separated because one of them took her own life following a sexually traumatizing incident. She was attacked. And this movie is a person unable to put themselves back together again in the wake of the most harrowing possible loss she could have experienced, really. And it is... I love a movie that spins out of control and goes crazy. I love the perfection. I love that movie ends up being like women with meat cleavers cutting a guy into pieces, and a fucking supercut that's a dueling cellos dance club sex scene in bisexual lighting. Oh my God, yes, give all that to me. But to have that eye of the storm that is Carey right in the center of it, just holding it all together in a constant state of crisis calm. Because there are such perfectly Carey Mulligan moments in this, where I was having a conversation with somebody recently who took issue with the film in the way that they didn't think it sufficiently interrogated the choices that Cassie was making, and that they kind of saw the movie as too flat as a result. And I was like, well, actually for me, I don't see this movie as inherently on the side of Carey at all. Like, I don't see this movie as inherently on the side of Cassie, and on the side of Cassie's choices. Mm-hmm. It is a movie that asks you to interrogate your empathy for Cassie in the face of her making really bad decisions.
She makes a lot of bad
really
decisions.
Dangerous decisions. And some of the strongest moments in the movie are when you see her reacting to what would be considered like a triumph in a more sort of straightforward, high-octane rape revenge film, where she can't cope with it, where she essentially gets a victory, and you see her responding as though she is just the shell of a person. Like, she completely takes that Dean to the cleaners, Connie Britton, and gets exactly what she wants out of her. It's just smacking gum in her office the entire time. And then she has the confrontation with the man in the truck, and they're parked at the same intersection. She gets out and beats the shit out of his car with a crowbar. That's not like a yas queen moment in the movie. She stands in the intersection with a train going behind her, and she looks like she's just been punched in the face. She doesn't know what to do with herself in that moment. After Alfred Molina completes his tearful mea culpa to her, and she at least exonerates him in the way that she doesn't go send somebody in to beat the shit out of him, she stands by her car, and she doesn't look happy. She looks damn near broken. And when the moment where Alison Brie's character, like, finally has that incredibly tense scene in her house where she gives her the tape of the attack on Nina, and she tells her, and one more thing, never fucking contact me again. she does not look like, well, bitch, you brought it on yourself. She looks conflicted over all of the difficult things she does in this movie. And the fact that she never lets you settle into the triumph of bloodlust. And she is so effective in her just micro business of how she gives a performance on her face. The delicate nature of that is just, it is vital to the, not even the success, but the survival of this film. And she does it so well that it makes it such a success. Like, Carey is the reason. The execution by Emerald Fennell, I think, is so deft and so tremendous. But the reason it's not just like a well-done movie, and the reason to me that it is so powerfully evocative and effective, is exactly because Emerald Fennell knew exactly what she needed. She pursued Carey Mulligan for it. Carey Mulligan delivered exactly what Emerald knew she had in her. And that is part of what makes this movie so good. Because of the awareness that Carey was the one who could bring this role to life.
She is tremendous in this movie. And I think the performance is very stylized. So it's hyper real. It's not real. And that's so very, because the character and what she goes through are sort of real dilemmas and real things that's happened to this woman. But the performance, because of what you were talking about, it was the candy colored and the way, the aesthetic choices of the movie, she has to tread this line between playing a real person, but also playing her hyper real in this very stylized way. And that is not a very easy thing to do. And she sort of gets that so correctly, like modulating against her voice, her body, everything. She uses all these instruments, obviously the costumes, the makeup, everything. She uses all those things to sort of give us so much. The one thing that, I like Promising Young Woman, but I do, if I had a little bit of criticism for it, is that I feel in the first half of the movie, in those scenes with all the men that she goes out with, like the movie never pulls the trigger on sort of like these men. I think at least a couple would be violent, or we never sort of see those scenes go till the end to sort of what the consequences are, because Cassie does make very bad choices. Like, she goes home with strange men who could literally kill her. And then, but the scenes, there is, I think, 2 or 3 of them, and they always end. To me, the ending of those scenes was a little flat, is that there was never any real threat to her. I mean, obviously, the movie in the end shows us that threat.
It's demanding a suspension of disbelief for those scenes.
Yeah.
Like, in that way, like, it's almost... almost in the way that like a ghost story or a supernatural story would, it asks you to consider, like, okay, the reality of the world is just that we're telling you that she's not going to get hurt in these scenes, so you're just going to have to go with us on this, because realistically, absolutely fucking not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Not.
And even with, with Connie Britton and with Allison, Cassie herself, this is not the movie this time, Cassie herself doesn't pull the trigger on those, like, she doesn't actually exact the revenge that she threatens. She stops just last of it, which to me is just like, I think the movie makes the choice at the end to kill Cassie. So I think they pulled the trigger at the end, but they didn't pull the trigger until the end. And I think that is why, because you've been let off the hook so many times that this movie is eminently safe. In that way. That's a good point.
And it sets you up for the old, like, you couldn't possibly think, and especially since the strangulation, the asphyxiation, it takes place over what I would imagine is a real-time framework. Like, the amount of time, it really hit me the second time I watched it, the amount of time you actually spend watching Al kill Cassie is like, oh my God, we're still in this. And you keep thinking, she's been let off the hook every time, there's no way. Someone's gonna come in, someone's gonna stop him. He's gonna stop himself. And he doesn't. And every single turn in the movie, it like you said, it had its finger on its trigger, and then it just removed it at the last second until it doesn't, and until you lose her. And I think one of my favorite points you made in all this is just like your emphasis on how important her vocal work is. And just one of my favorite lines she's ever delivered is when she's in the cafe with Laverne Cox, and she's like, Laverne's like, why don't you move out of your parents' house? Like, why are you still in my shitty coffee shop? And she just has that tremendous response where she's like, listen, I could have it all. I could have the success, I could have the job, I could have the house, I could go out and get that in 10 minutes. I don't want it. And her voice is so much, it's perpetually surprising to me almost how low Carey Mulligan's voice is, because she's so lithe and she's so delicate, and she's got this nice almost rasp to her sometimes, and I like it especially in her when she does her American accent. I think it really, like, the dryness is a little bit extra, and just like, I don't want it more, yeah. I don't want it. And because she is at that sort of middle vocal register for so much of her acting work, when she does explode every so often, it's so rewarding. So no matter like how heightened and intense the things are she's doing in this movie, there's also oh god, the incredible, where she has Al chained up to the bed, and she's like, say it, like, tell me what you did, tell me, and he's just not doing it, and she, he tells, like, I was just a kid, like, there was nothing, like, nothing really, and she just snaps and shouts, wrong, and you're so disarmed by the fact that she shouted at him. It is just like, it's like somehow Carey Mulligan yelling is like a nuclear weapon she keeps in her back pocket. And all she has to do is shout, wrong! And you're like, oh my god, it's fucking over. It's fucking over. Like, this is a brawl for all. Like, it is unreal how she can just change the tone of a scene by even doing that, because the explosion is so contained. That volcano's got the caldera just kept right on the top of it until it breaks through. And it's so rewarding when it does. And she just has that low, sardonic voice down so well. And this character is basically the definition of that low, sardonic voice. And that's like my favorite voice that Carey does. So it's getting to see a greatest hits of the thing that I enjoy most about Carey Mulligan as an acting presence. And it just like distilled into one movie that also has an incredible soundtrack and men being raked over the coals. It's just a perfect combination of those things.
It's a great movie to watch if you like Carey Mulligan. She's so amazing in it. It's great.
Yeah, like if you're like, even if you like, if somebody out there is a Carey Mulligan completist, you simply couldn't miss this role.
Absolutely.
And the use of food in that movie is so good too. And she does such, like, the fact that Carey's always gnawing on something, she's always chewing on something, she's always eating. Her choreography with that, like the blocking around that, and the way she just works that into her character so blithely, always kind of mouthing on something, the way that communicates sort of her like detachment from anything she's interacting with, because it's like, I'm constantly busying myself with something that's not you. Like, make me care more than my Twizzler, and like maybe we can have a conversation. I just, like, the power that she imbues into sort of everything just by chewing on a straw, I think is a testament to, like, the amazing physical acting that we've seen at multiple points in her career. But then in that, it's like, God, even when you do that, you are just fucking devastating.
Yeah. It's a wonderful performance, and as you can tell, listeners, both Jordan and I love Carey, and we recommended 3 movies to you. So, Jordan, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you
so much for having me. This has truly been so much fun, and it's fun having a very excited, exuberant conversation about Carey Mulligan when she's a reserved and stoic figure, and it's like, no, let's shout about how like delightful Carey Mulligan is.
She's so great. I love her. I think these movies are great. I think she finally got that second Oscar nomination, 11 years after An Education for Promising Young Woman. And so what a time to celebrate Carey Mulligan. I'm happy the world has finally acknowledged, not that the Oscars and awards are everything, but they're definitely an indication that there is respect and admiration, and she deserves.
And it's a thing that, like, if you're the most casual of movie watcher, I think a thing that kind of recognition does, even if, like, it can be overinflated, or it can, the horse race of it is really brutal. It draws other eyes to you that might not have known to look your direction in the first place. Yeah. And that's very cool. Like, the idea of her getting more of that shine that she deserves. And the idea, too, like, offers come with awards and nominations. And the idea of Carey having more choices to make her, like, very curative decisions based off of, I want her to have the best possible options in front of her. So, yes.
Me too. Again, Jordan, what a wonderful conversation. You've been a wonderful guest. I loved having you. Please come back.
Please have me. Absolutely.
And before we go, tell our listeners where they can find you and your work.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Jorcru, Jorcru, and then you can find me on my Patreon at patreon.com/Crucchiola, where I write some stuff and I make my podcasts, and you can enjoy those things. It's open to anybody, to like who wants to click on it, but feel free to support as well, because why wouldn't you?
Yes. Support Jordan, read her work, listen to her podcast. She's one of my favorite cultural voices, and this is why it was such a joy for me to have you on Sundays with Kate to talk about Carey Mulligan. And you can find me on Twitter at ME_says and follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at Sundays with Kate. Until next time, thank you for listening.